The doors of the grand hall burst open before anyone could stop them, and the room fell into silence so sudden it felt like the air itself had frozen. I was already moving before the echo of that sound faded, my hand sliding toward the weapon at my belt, my eyes locking onto the massive figure filling the doorway. 9 feet of gray muscle wrapped in ceremonial armor, tusks capped in polished steel, eyes glowing like 2 dying suns. Everyone in the Dorn estate knew that shape. Everyone feared it. His name was Threk Ozar Van, and the news feeds across a dozen star systems called him the Galactic Titan, a being who had never once lost a challenge in 400 recorded duels. He did not walk into that hall, he arrived in it, the way a storm arrives, the way gravity arrives, with no patience for doors or greetings, or the comfort of the people standing in his path. "Your house owes a debt," he said, his voice rolling through the chamber like distant thunder. "Send a champion, or send the girl to kneel before me." Every eye in the room turned toward Lady Alira Vashtok, the youngest heir of House Dorn, standing near the long table with her fingers frozen around a crystal glass. Her 6 personal guards stood just behind her, armed, trained, decorated with medals from a dozen campaigns. Not one of them stepped forward. Not one of them even lifted a hand. I did not wait for them to find their courage. I stepped in front of her, placing myself squarely between the girl I was paid to protect and the creature who could tear through steel with his bare hands. "I'll stand for the house," I said. Threk Ozar looked down at me the way someone looks at an insect that has wandered onto a dinner plate. "You are staff," he said, "nothing more." "I'm the bodyguard," I answered. "Guarding is the job. Today, apparently, that means this." Behind me, Alira grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Daniel, don't be a fool," she hissed. "You are not a soldier. You are not a warrior. You are just a bodyguard. He will end you in seconds, and it will change nothing." "Then it will be a short fight," I said, and I stepped forward into the space they were already clearing across the marble floor, a ring forming out of fear and instinct as the crowd pulled back toward the walls. Here is something the galaxy had forgotten to ask about the Krivtal warriors and their endless winning streak. Every challenger who had ever stood across from Threk Ozar had already believed, somewhere deep in their bones, that they were going to lose. Their species were faster, their claws were sharper, their bodies were built for war in ways mine never would be. But their hearts had already surrendered before the first strike ever landed, because losing to him was expected, was tradition, was simply how the universe worked. Nobody had ever told me that I was supposed to fall the same way. He came at me first, faster than something his size should ever move, a fist like a wrecking ball aimed straight at my skull. I could not dodge it cleanly. Nothing built like me could dodge something with that kind of reach. So I did what years of close protection training had actually taught me, which had very little to do with winning fights and everything to do with surviving them. I turned into the blow instead of away from it, letting it graze my shoulder instead of my jaw, using the spin of my own body to drive my elbow into the joint of his knee. He roared, not from pain but from surprise. 400 fights, and it seemed nobody had ever managed to hit him anywhere that was not his face. "You do not fight like prey," he growled. "I'm not prey," I said, circling him now, keeping my feet light on the polished floor. "I'm the man standing between you and my client. That's a different job than the one you're used to facing." He came again, more careful this time, and that carefulness told me everything I needed to know. I had made the undefeated champion of the Krivtal Dominion cautious, and caution was not something 400 years of easy victories had ever prepared him for. I ducked beneath a strike that would have taken my head clean off, drove my shoulder into his ribs, and pushed with everything I had. He staggered back one single step. It was such a small thing, but nobody in that room had ever seen him take a step back before, and the silence that followed was louder than any cheer could have been. We traded blows for what felt like an hour but was probably closer to 2 minutes. I took a hit that cracked something deep in my side, a pain so sharp it stole my breath for half a second. I gave one back that split the skin above his eye, the first wound he had carried out of a duel in almost a decade. I was not winning. I want to be honest about that. There was no version of this fight where I could outmuscle 9 feet of Dominion warrior. But I was not losing either, not the way I was supposed to. Not the quick and clean way 400 challengers before me had fallen as a formality before him. I was still standing when he finally raised one massive hand and called an end to the match. "Enough," he said, and the hall did not dare to move. "This one does not fight to lose. There is no honor in breaking something that refuses to break." He looked past me toward Alira, who I am fairly certain had stopped breathing somewhere around the second exchange. "The debt is forgiven," he announced, "not because your house has paid it, Because your staff did not know he was supposed to lose. Then his glowing eyes turned back to me, and something passed behind them that might have been respect. What is your name, Bodyguard? Daniel Foss, I told him. He nodded slowly, like he was filing the name away somewhere permanent, somewhere he would not forget. I will remember it, he said. Then he turned and left the hall the same way he had entered it, like the room belonged to him. Though this time every noble watching him go wore a very different expression than the one they had worn when he first arrived. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The medic had barely finished wrapping the bruised ribs along my side when the first scream tore through the estate. It came from the eastern corridor, near the private study where Alira had gone to recover from the shock of the afternoon. I was moving before I even finished processing the sound, sprinting down the marble hallway with my side burning like fire, shoving past startled staff who did not understand what was happening yet. I understood immediately. The debt had been forgiven publicly, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras that fed straight into a dozen star systems. That was a humiliation the rival houses could use. And rival houses did not forgive humiliation easily. I found Alira's personal secretary, a young woman named Grace Whitmore, standing frozen in the study doorway, her hand pressed against a wound in her shoulder that had clearly not come from any blade or blaster. A thin dart, barely visible, was lodged just below her collarbone. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. Grace pointed a shaking finger toward the garden terrace, unable to form words through the pain and the fear tightening her throat. I ran. The garden terrace stretched out under a darkening sky, rows of alien flowers glowing faintly in the twilight, and there, near the far railing, stood a man I recognized instantly, Colin Ashby, an emissary from House Wren, one of the rival families that had been circling House Dorn's territory for years, waiting for exactly this kind of opening. He had one arm locked around Alira's throat and the other holding a small device against her temple, something humming with a low electronic pulse that I did not need explaining to understand was dangerous. "Stay back," Colin snarled as I stepped onto the terrace. One more step and I released the charge. Her house forgives its debts in public and expects the rest of us to simply accept the shame that comes with it. I will not accept it. "You're going to kill an innocent girl to save your pride," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, my hands raised where he could see them. "That's not strength. That's fear wearing a fancy coat." "Careful," he warned, tightening his grip on the device. I took one slow step forward anyway, calculating the distance, the angle, the half-second of hesitation I needed him to make. Every second I kept him talking was a second his focus stayed split between me and the girl trembling in his grip. "You watched the fight today," I said. "Everyone did. You saw what happens when someone underestimates the person standing in front of them." His eyes flickered, just for a moment, toward the memory of the duel, toward the story that was already spreading across every newsfeed in the sector. That flicker was all I needed. I closed the distance in 3 fast strides, catching his wrist before the device could fully activate, twisting it away from Alira's temple while pulling her free with my other arm. Colin stumbled backward, dropping the device, which clattered harmlessly across the stone tiles instead of completing whatever it had been built to do. Security arrived seconds later, alerted by the earlier scream, surrounding him before he could recover his footing or reach for anything else hidden beneath his coat. Alira collapsed against me, shaking, gasping for air that had been cut off for far too long. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's the job," I said simply, helping her stand as the guards dragged Colin away in restraints. It took hours for the estate to settle back into something resembling calm. Investigators from the regional council arrived to question everyone involved. House Wren issued a swift and desperate denial of any official involvement, though nobody in that hall believed a word of it, and Grace was carried off to the medical wing where doctors assured everyone the dart had carried a paralytic rather than anything lethal, meant only to remove her from the equation rather than end her life. By the time the last official left the estate, night had fully settled over the grounds, and Alira found me standing alone on the same terrace where everything had nearly gone wrong, staring out at the stars scattered across a sky that felt entirely too calm after everything the day had thrown at us. "I called you just a bodyguard," she said quietly, coming to stand beside me, in front of the entire summit, in front of him. "You did," I agreed, not bothering to soften it. "I was wrong." "You were," I said, though there was no anger in it, only simple truth spoken plainly between two people who had both nearly lost something today. "But you're not the first person to see the uniform and miss the person wearing it." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars, her arms wrapped around herself against the cool night air. "Why did you step in front of me? Both times. With him, and then with Colin. You could have let your guards handle it. You could have stepped back and let it play out. Because that's not how the job works, I said. Guarding isn't about standing near someone until the moment it gets difficult. It's about standing there, especially when it gets difficult. Otherwise, it's just decoration. She almost smiled at that, the first real expression I had seen cross her face since the doors had burst open that afternoon. Threk Ozar said he would remember your name. He did. Do you think he meant it as a threat? I considered the question honestly before answering. No, I said finally. I think creatures like him spend their entire lives surrounded by people who already believe they've lost before the fight even starts. I think today was the first time in a long while that someone looked back at him and didn't flinch. I don't think he'll forget that easily, and I don't think it was meant as a threat at all. 3 days later, a transport arrived at the estate without warning, carrying no diplomatic seal, no formal announcement, nothing but a single passenger who stepped down onto the landing platform and immediately drew every eye on the grounds. Threk Ozar Van stood there in simpler armor than before, without the ceremonial chains, without the Ministrix officials trailing behind him, alone in a way that felt almost unnatural for someone of his reputation. I met him at the base of the platform, my hand resting near my weapon out of habit rather than genuine expectation of trouble. I did not come to fight, he said before I could ask. I came because word travels fast among my people, and I heard what happened here after our match. A coward with a device against a girl's temple, hiding behind fear because he could not face his enemies directly. We handled it, I said. I know, he answered, and something almost like amusement flickered across his heavy features. That is precisely why I came. House Wren has spent years testing the borders of every territory near this one, waiting for weakness. I do not involve myself in the politics of smaller houses as a rule, but I find myself curious what happens to a house that employs someone who does not know how to lose. So what does that mean for us? Alyra asked, stepping out onto the platform behind me, her chin raised, despite the tension still visible in her shoulders. It means House Wren would be wise to look elsewhere for their next target, Threk Ozar said simply. My reputation carries weight in this sector, whether I intended to or not. Let it be known that House Dorn stood against me and did not break, and that I have no interest in seeing lesser predators circle what I have already tested myself. It was not friendship. I understood that much clearly. It was something closer to respect between two forces who recognized strength when they saw it, regardless of the shape it came wrapped in. But in a galaxy built on power and reputation, that kind of respect could shield a house far better than any army ever could. He turned to leave as quickly as he had arrived, pausing only once at the edge of the platform to look back at me. You should have died today, he said, not unkindly, simply stating a fact the way one might comment on the weather. Against me, and again against the coward on the terrace. Most beings who face two such moments in a single day do not walk away from either. I had a job to do, I said. Walking away wasn't part of it. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. The closest thing to approval I suspected he ever offered anyone. Perhaps humanity deserves its reputation after all, he said. And then he was gone, his transport lifting off into a sky just beginning to catch the first light of morning. Alyra stood beside me long after the ship had disappeared from view, watching the empty sky where it had been. Just a bodyguard, she said softly, almost laughing at the memory of her own words from days before. Just a bodyguard, I agreed, and this time neither of us believed it meant nothing at all. The estate returned to its usual rhythm in the days that followed, staff moving through familiar routines, guards resuming familiar posts, the entire household settling back into the comfortable illusion of normal life. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently, in the way people looked at me when I passed through the halls. Nobody called me staff anymore, not the way they once had, not with that same careless dismissal in their voice. I did not need the recognition. I never had. I had taken this job to do exactly what I did on that terrace, exactly what I did in that ring, standing between danger and the person I was sworn to protect, regardless of size, regardless of reputation, regardless of whether the galaxy believed someone like me belonged in that position at all. But it turned out, in the end, that the galaxy was paying closer attention than I expected, and somewhere out among the stars, a titan who had never lost a single fight now carried the memory of the one man who had never let him win completely either. I went back to standing in doorways, watching exits, doing the job nobody thought twice about until the day it mattered more than anything else in the world. And somewhere, on a distant world I would probably never see, a legend told a story about the day he met a bodyguard who did not know how to fall.